Thank you for tuning in. I'm here today with Connor Boyack, author of the Tuttle Twins books and the president of the L'Abertas Institute. We're going to be talking about homeschooling and the famous Tuttle Twins. Connor, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Appreciate it.
So I have been following Tuttle Twins for years, and I've actually been really interested in the stuff you're doing. Right now, I think it is very topical with the concern of the woke mind virus that is hopefully receding. Tell us a little bit, okay, what's the connection with schooling, the school system, and wokeness?
Oh, okay, that's an interesting question. I agree. I feel like the election results mean that the woke mind virus is kind of on the defense now. Even the morning, I don't know how soon you're publishing this, but the morning of our recording, AOC was reported to have taken pronouns out of her bio. Just all this stuff is happening where it's clear that the DEI woke camp is on the defensive. But as I like to say, the school system is the petri dish in which the woke mind virus incubates and flourishes. And so, sure, there's kind of this reduction in wokeness that we're going to experience because, conservatives have kind of retaken the bully pulpit, and the woke will have to go kind of back to their shadows and corners until they can regroup. But if we really want lasting change, I feel like we have to uproot the woke mind virus from the school system. And we have to confront the fact that if we entrust our children's education during their most intellectually formative years, by the way, to an institution in which these hostile values can spread, then we're forever playing defense, right? Because we're always letting these kids get indoctrinated in this way. And then when they're adults, do we then go to them with our think tanks and our white papers and our videos and our content? Instead, I think we need to start earlier. I think those of us who value liberty need to focus on the family. We got to focus on helping parents teach their young children and kind of building a wall, a shield against these ideas in their home. I like to say that I don't think we're going to save our country in the Capitol or in the courtroom, even though we should engage there and defend our values and our ideas. I think if we're going to save our families or save our country, it's at the family dinner table. And that's where we have to optimize for. We have to incubate critical thinking and what it looks like to be skeptical of, authority and questioning what you're hearing in the media, and develop that intellectual rigor. That happens in the home. It doesn't happen in the schools. It doesn't happen in media or social media. We really need to equip parents to talk to their kids about these ideas and be able to promote and defend them. So that's what Tuttle Twins is after, giving parents tools that they can use in the home to learn about and talk to their kids about these ideas. And now with, 6 million books sold and a lot more going on, it's really spread, which is gratifying. But I think we've just begun, basically.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That sort of image that, the kids start out because of K-12 indoctrination, really K-16, they are so far left that we have to spend like the rest of their life trying to get them back just to neutral. It's just a massive challenge. And you also see it with a lot of parents. My brother did not have any kids because he said that kids always hate their parents. And historically, that is not how it worked, right? Kids did not automatically detest their parents. I think in many ways it's true today, right? You see it in, movies or media where, the teenager is rolling her eyes at her idiot dad. That's not natural, right?
It's not natural. And as a homeschool dad myself, I myself am a product of what I like to call the public school system. I went to public school back in the 80s, 90s. It was the homeschoolers who were the weirdos at the time because they were these reclusive families that no one really knew, so it was easy to malign them. We've homeschooled our kids, though, since the beginning. It's a different world. Now it's the public school kids that are more often the weirdos than the homeschooling ones. And what you find in these school campuses is what you found for decades. It's just toxic behavior, like social unruliness, drugs, sexual abuse, all kinds of stuff. And it's not a great environment in which to raise kids. It's certainly not fertile ground in which to spread our ideas about, human flourishing and free markets and non-aggression principle and all these types of things. So ultimately, I think parents need to step into the breach and realize that educating our children is our responsibility, and we shouldn't be delegating it to institutions that hate us. Vadi Bakum is a Baptist pastor. He has this quote I love where he says that we can't continue to send our children to Caesar's schools and be surprised when they return home as Romans, right? And so you get all these parents who are, let's say, conservatives or libertarians, and pretty soon their children as teenagers or young adults become social justice warrior, woke, whatever, and they're shocked. They're like, where did we go wrong? We thought that we were, like, well, yeah, but you're surrendering your children for the majority of their day and their productive hours to these institutions that don't share your values and are hostile to them. So, I do a lot of speaking at homeschool conferences and so forth, and a lot of what I share boils down to telling parents, like, it is easier than ever before to homeschool, or if you're not going to homeschool, there's so many abundant options with microschooling and private schools that are far different than even a decade, let alone 2 or 3 decades ago when we were of that age. And really just trying to give that empowering message that, like, where there's a will, there's a way. You can pull your kids out of these institutions. You can shield them from what you were just saying, Peter, which is kind of this toxic parent-child, behavior and relationship. I think homeschooling or micro schools, private schools are a great option for the vast majority of families, whether they are upper class, middle class. There's all kinds of options, no matter your socioeconomic position. And I think ultimately it's worth the sacrifice to do, because you don't want your children to grow up hating you. You don't want them to become part of the woke mob and get taken over like the Borg and Star Trek. There's a better way, and it's never been easier to do.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm going to ask you about some of the finances and, some of the other sort of common, questions if somebody's thinking about homeschooling. I think you're absolutely right. You cannot put a dollar value on the idea that your kids are going to come out as independent, capable, loving. They're not going to get involved with drugs and move back in when they're 35 with that's very hard to put a price on these things. And, if you compare that to the effort that goes into homeschooling, which we also homeschool. So, I think it's a heck of a lot easier than people imagine. And, one thing that I want to ask you about, so I think a lot of people don't understand how recent homeschooling is in this country. So it was only fully legalized nationwide in 1993. So I was in my 20s. So like nobody my age was homeschooled. I mean, there were some states, but there was this, huge legal battles in the 70s and 80s. You had Amish Bob, who was a guy who was not Amish, but he was taking advantage of a loophole, taking advantage of a good way to make a political point. And of course, since then, it's exploded, right? So, so some numbers, 1999, about 850,000 kids in the U.S. were homeschooling. That's about 2%. By 2016, it was 2.3 million. That's close to 5%. And of course, during the pandemic, it soared. So that jumped to 3.7 million by 2021, so about 7%. It would be even higher, except that there are states that make it very, very difficult to homeschool. So New York, about 1% homeschool, Massachusetts, 1.5%. And meanwhile, North Carolina, Oklahoma, about 8%, Alaska, 16%. So you've got this massive growth, starting in really around the late 80s. So why are people turning to homeschooling? And specifically, talk about the COVID jump. What happened there?
Well, first, I want to quibble with your data a little bit in a good way, and that is these data sets that we get to track the rise of homeschooling or just assess how many families are homeschooling are inadequate. They're incomplete. There are many states in which you can't get this data. My own state is one of them. There's no centralized, resource that can fully track this, because you got many families who are just independently homeschooling and no one is the wiser, and they're not part of any data. They're not sending in any forms or doing anything. So I think the number is bigger. How much? I don't know. But that to me is kind of exciting that we're underreporting how much this is proliferated. You mentioned this COVID bump. I'll give you a little anecdote that paints the picture. My wife, of course, we homeschool, as I said. And so when COVID hit, of course, everyone's homeschooling for at least a few weeks when they shut down the schools all over the place. And so my wife in our backyard did a little cottage meeting for all the neighbors, because everyone was like, hey, you homeschool, can you help us figure out how to do this? And these parents were just clueless, because to them, school is, give my kid a sack lunch and make sure they have their backpack, and then off they go to the babysitter. So they were caught off guard, and they were really looking for help. And so my wife was able to share a lot of resources and so forth. Of course, after COVID settled, a lot of these parents just put their kids, most of these parents just put their kids right back in. But you did have a lot of parents who I'll share kind of the plural of anecdotes of many stories that I've heard boiled down to this. Parents would homeschool their kids for those first few weeks. They'd realize that their children were able to get done in like an hour and a half, what otherwise was supposedly taking them 6 or 7 hours. They had healthier relationships with their kids. Their kids weren't coming home, being bullied or disrespectful or whatever. The kids felt liberated because they had so much more of their day that they were able to just like play or go do whatever they want once they were done with their schoolwork. So you had a lot of parents who realized, hey, we can actually do this. Combined with the shift to kind of remote work for a lot of kind of knowledge workers and a lot of families who have jobs that can accommodate that, suddenly you had situations where, a mom or even a dad could be like, well, I can, work from home multiple days. We can juggle with me and my wife or my spouse or whatever. And we can now educate our kids at home and save money and let our kids have fun. Like so many stories like that of parents just being forced into this experiment, but then realizing, hey, this isn't actually as bad as I once thought it was. And there's actually a lot of positives. And so you had a lot of, in fact, when I speak at homeschooling conferences, I do probably, 6 to 10 a year. And before COVID, I would always, raise your hand if you, as the parent, were homeschooled yourself. And it was very mixed. And pre-COVID, you'd probably have like a third of the hands would go up saying that they were homeschooled themselves. So still a lot of influx from, new families. Now, when I do that question post-COVID, it's like 99% of the parents in that room were themselves, products of the public school system. They're new to homeschooling. And so there's just a lot of new blood, which means the market is responding. There's a lot of curricula out there. Homeschool co-ops have exploded. There's a lot of different models, a lot of different, Tuttle Twins even, right? So many of these resources have kind of responded to the growing market and trying to serve these families who are hungry for not just taking the textbook from the government school and then reading that in the home. That's not the true vision of homeschooling. The true vision of homeschooling, as you can no doubt appreciate yourself with your family, is kind of liberating your child to let them go deep in what they're interested about and what their path of life is, rather than requiring them to conform to someone else's standard of what every, ninth grader must be forced to learn only to soon forget. That's the true vision of home education. And it's one where there's so many resources and models now to support parents in giving those children that opportunity. It's a very bright future. And then I get excited thinking 10, 20, 50 years from now, what does society look like where you have an ever increasing number of kids who grew up in this mode of education that honors their individuality, that respects their time and their humanity, that empowers them to go down a path that they want? I get excited thinking about that future, and I think it can be very bright.
A word from our lead sponsor, Unchained.com. The holidays are coming, and it's time to think about your annual IRA contributions. An IRA is an investment vehicle that can save you a lot of taxes. And with Unchained, you can hold real Bitcoin in your IRA, get access to trading, inheritance, and loans. It's the only company where you hold the keys and can verify that your Bitcoin is not being relent like banks do. We've seen futures-based ETFs underperform holding your own Bitcoin, so why settle for less? Book a friendly consultation at unchained.com/Bitcoin-IRA. Now back to our show. We also homeschooled our kids, and it is shocking the things they know. Just like you said, they typically take about 1 to 2 hours a day to finish their curriculum. They are very advanced on all topics. It's almost a cliche, the homeschool kid who's starting on college work in 8th grade. That's not because we're bragging about the kids. That's because that's how long it takes. If the kid is allowed to do the material on their own, a couple hours a day, they're going to be finished with the entire 12 years within 8. And, along the way, our son developed an interest in science. And we were talking about, okay, how do we get him interested? There's video games you can get. I think Universe Unlimited or something. Anyway, there are video games that teach science as well. So that worked. And then we thought, just kind of brainstorming, we were like, well, maybe we could have him go to the local high school and take a course. And we looked at each other and laughed. And we were like, that's how you would get him uninterested in science. Like, you wanted to ruin it for him. You would stick him in day prison every single day and have them sit there and listen to somebody who probably has zero science training, who has, no interest. They're running out the clock for their pension. But that's something, I think the time constraints, for us anyway, we added up the hours that we spent, but we sent the kids to school for like a couple weeks, and we added up the hours we were spending on it. You got to get them up in the morning. You yourself have to get up at like 6, which is not civilized. They give you assignments, like what we had to find 17 types of flour or something. And I'm like, where am I going to get 17? Like, could you guys buy them and bill us? The kids get constantly sick. We sat there and tallied up the days they were sick. And like 1/5 or 1/7 of the weeks they're sick when they're in school because, of course they're petri dishes, right? They are very similar to persons. So when we tallied up the time, you actually save time. But what I'm curious, so you mentioned co-ops earlier. If you don't have one parent who can stay home, because I think that's, for a lot of people, that's kind of a deal breaker on homeschooling. What kinds of solutions are there?
Yeah, so co-ops are, I think, the biggest model that have an advantage for parents who require, some schedule flexibility on their part, whether because of a job or other reasons. Think of these like, family-based private schools where you get 10, 20, in our co-op, 30 plus families together, and the parents can all contribute. And so, for example, you got a mom who was a biology major in college. Now she can teach a science class because it's something she's knowledge about and passionate about. I've taught classes for a co-op. One was called the Controversial Classics, where we'd read things like Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau, right? And we'd go through it and we'd have these engaging discussions. Or I did a class on persuasive writing and persuasive speaking. And so I can contribute, I did one on economics. So I can contribute my skill set and do classes for the kids. And then it's only taking a little bit out of my day. I'd go in the morning for an hour, once a week, and I can work my schedule around that. But now I'm contributing. The other families are contributing. My kids can be there for multiple hours a day. So if I needed to be away and then go pick them up, later in the day, I still could. So there's lots of co-ops that are just springing up. These are, of course, arising kind of out of the pandemic pods is what they were called during COVID, where you had these families kind of grouping together. So there's just an explosion of co-ops. There's also micro schools, which is a really popular one. They're basically mini private schools. What happened post-pandemic is a lot of teachers realized that it was a great opportunity for them to go start up their own little pandemic pod type of situation where they could be liberated from all the bureaucracy and all the top-down mandates, and they could do what they love and in many cases are good at, which is teaching. And so they could start up their own little school. They could gather 11 kids from the neighborhood, charge them each, whatever you're going to charge them, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, whatever. And suddenly you're basically recreating your entire salary plus, potential benefits and all the costs that go into that. And you're your own little education entrepreneur. So now you have all these micro schools that are started by former teachers, or they're started by education entrepreneurs who go out and hire teachers to then staff these schools. And so you get groups like a popular one, for example, is called Acton Academy. And they have these all around the country where you get people who start up their own little school and they'll have a, K through 3 and a 4 through 6th grade and a high school and so forth. So you have a lot of these as well. Now, to that, you might say, okay, well, that's great, but not everyone can afford, paying even a few $1,000s for tuition. Homeschooling is like dang cheap. Like, that's not really a financial barrier. It's more, as you say, kind of a schedule barrier if you really want to lean in and do that yourself. Micro schooling, private schooling, then you get into tuition because you're, of course, hiring someone to do your natural job as parent to educate your children. Now, the solution for that, the solve here, is a lot of states are, for example, the thing that's always bugged me as a homeschooling dad is I have to first pay all the taxes for everyone else's kids to go to this indoctrination camp. And then only with whatever money I may or may not have left over am I able to educate my own children, whether as a homeschooling dad or if I were to put them in a private school. So you have models now coming out of states around the country called education spending accounts or education savings accounts. And what these are is a way to reclaim some or all of that, tax money. Basically say, if I were to put my kids in public school, taxpayers would be paying 10 grand, 15 grand, whatever it is. Give me a portion of that money because I'm not going to put the kids in school and I want to get my tax money back. and I'm going to go, put my kids in this, private school. So a lot of the red states have been passing these programs. And I think now with the red wave that we've just experienced, there will be even more energy for school choice. Trump himself has put out content saying he supports at the federal level creating tax credits so that homeschooling families can get back their tax money and educate their own children. So the financial barriers are coming down. As I said earlier, though, where there's a will, there's a way. I know single moms who work 2 jobs who are still homeschooling their kids. And sometimes that's getting help from grandma or from a sister, or your church, or getting creative. But there's so many ways to do it. There's so many institutions now that we're building, like the micro schools and the homeschool co-ops, that for the parents who do want to prioritize this, you're going to be able to find a way to do it. It might require some creativity and flexibility, but there's never been a better time to try. And I think the need has never been more dire than to take our children out of the indoctrination camps and put them on a better path.
Yeah. I think I've been pushing homeschooling as well. You and I both on X or Twitter. And, another thing that I think a lot of people worry about is that they're not smart enough. And, which is, for the record, education majors are like down there with, they're one of the worst majors.
Gender studies.
They really are. Like the test scores, the average IQ, it's rough. But I think a lot of parents are still sort of intimidated by the imagery of the school, and they imagine that they're not smart enough. Maybe talk a little bit about, that broad point, but also about some of the curriculum out there, including what you do.
I love this question because, Peter, you've pinpointed, I think, a core fear that first-time homeschoolers have or potential homeschoolers have before they say, because they, especially the moms, because this mostly falls on the moms, I'd say, 95% plus of the primary homeschooling parent is the mother. What happens, and this is born out of all the talks I've given at homeschool conferences, all the questions I get, I'm synthesizing this down into what I think is the core fear that I've heard expressed. And that is the insecurities that bubble up in that mom about their own educational inadequacies. I didn't do good, in math in school, and now I have to help my kid with calculus, right? Or I was never a good writer, how can I be a good English teacher? The message that I bring when I do public speaking around this topic is that I think that's a completely false conception about what it takes to be a good homeschooling parent. To which I then say, literally all you need to be a good homeschooling parent is to be good at doing a Google search, or, now I use Perplexity rather than Google, or, DuckDuckGo, or pick your alternative non-woke corporate tool. All you need to be good at is doing research. And every mom is good at like hunting for deals on Amazon and looking for things online, right? Everyone has that skill. And so what I tell them is like, there's such an abundance of information out there, including free information, where you can find all kinds of stuff for your child. You don't need to be the expert, in calculus. You can go find certainly Khan Academy, but you can go on YouTube, or you can find podcasts, or you can go to Barnes & Noble and find creative books that make it fun and easy for kids. You just have to be a good resource provider. You don't need to see yourself as the person who must be the knower of all the things. That is the authoritarian model of education, right? Where I'm the teacher, you must believe me, I'm transmitting this knowledge to you. No, you don't need to be the authoritarian. You need to be the partner. How much more inspiring it is for your kid when they come to you with a question, for you to say, I don't know, let's figure that out together. And they can see you as someone who is acquiring the information. Peter, I want to stress this important point, because this is something that I feel like a lot of parents have a hang up with in that authoritarian model of education. The authoritarian model, our schooling system, uses what is called what I call a just-in-case model, right? Just in case you're going to become a rocket scientist 30 years from now, you need to learn the quadratic equation, right? Just in case you become a marine biologist, you need to know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? We don't know what you're going to be 30 years from now. So just in case you go down one of these 832 career paths, we need to cram your head full of all this knowledge right now, just in case you'll need it in the future, right? So that's the just in case method. The way that you and I learn, the way that all normal humans adults, anyways, learn is not through the just-in-case model. It's what I call the just-in-time model. Like your refrigerator breaks down. You never think to yourself, gee whiz, 8 years ago when we bought this refrigerator, I'm so thankful that I read from beginning to end the owner's manual for such a time as this, that I could be prepared with that knowledge. No, just in time for when your refrigerator breaks down, you go acquire the knowledge. You pull out the owner's manual, you pull up a YouTube video, you call your, Uncle Fred, who's a really handy guy, whatever, right? You're scrappy, you figure it out. And so what's important is learning how to learn, learning where to find the information. And so it's so much more empowering for our kids when we can model for them that normal human behavior, right? It's very reassuring for them to realize, oh, I don't need to memorize everything. I don't need to become this encyclopedia of knowledge. I mean, especially with AI, that's completely going out the window, right? And so let's model for our children a method of learning that's human and humane. Let's give them the same opportunity of pursuing a just-in-time method of learning. So with that, to the latter part of your question, there's so many resources out there. I don't even want to start listing them because there's just a crazy abundance of, like, a popular one that a lot of homeschooling families use, just as an example, is OutSchool. So outschool.com is kind of an online library of courses on a wide range of topics. One day, my son was really vibing with illustration. He was wanting to learn how to draw. Boom, here's this, marketplace of like 83 different illustrators, one more focused on manga and another more focused on comic book style. And like just this amazing marketplace of content creators who offer classes based on all these little niche, issues. And so this becomes an amazing place where you can go acquire whatever knowledge you want. Certainly YouTube, podcasts, everything else. For us, with the Tuttle Twins, it boils down to this, and I'll wrap here. What we realized when we started producing these resources early on, we thought we were creating children's books, right? And fundamentally, that's what they are, right? For different ages, we have books for toddlers and for elementary age and for teenagers. We thought, hey, we're creating these children's books. What we realized a few years into doing this, and we've actually validated this with surveys. In fact, I'll just share the survey result. So consistently in our community, these are parents who are buying the books for their children. That's why they're buying the books. It's about 56% of parents who get our books for their kids. 56% say that they themselves are learning things for the first time. And so what we're finding is that these are family educational resources. These are a way for kids and parents to learn. You'll appreciate this fun story. Dad wrote me, this is about a year ago now, inflation was in the news. Of course, it still is, but it was really red hot at the time. The dad is in the car with 9-year-old daughter and I think another kid or two. They're listening to the local NPR station. They're blabbing about inflation. They're talking to like the economist from the local community college. You know where this is going now. And they're saying, well, why is inflation happening? To which the economist replies and says something like, well, I'll tell you why. It's because prices are too high. You look at these Taylor Swift concert tickets, they're charging exorbitant prices. We just need to pull those prices down, cool off the economy, and then inflation will lower. To which the 9-year-old daughter in the back seat pipes up and says, that's not true. Inflation is because the Federal Reserve is printing a bunch of money. And so the dad, of course, turns out the radio. He's laughing. He and she had read our Creature from the Tuttle Twins and the Creature from Jekyll Island book, all about the Fed and inflation. That's what we're after, is opportunities for like parents and kids to learn together, to talk about these ideas together over the dinner table, in the car. And whether it's Tuttle Twins or any number of other resources, again, I just want to stress for the homeschooling curious, there's just such an abundance of resources, many of them free out there for you to explore with. It's just a different world. And I just say dive in the deep end and have fun with it, because there's so much out there that makes the job easy, I think, for parents.
If you own gold, you've probably been very happy with prices hitting all-time highs. But your gold can do more than just go up. It can generate passive income for you. With monetary metals, you can earn up to 5% interest on your gold and silver, paid in more ounces. Credit investors can even achieve double-digit returns in their bond offerings. All interest is paid in ounces of gold and silver stored in your account free of charge. If your metal is gathering dust at home or costing storage fees in a vault, it's time to start putting your metal to work with Monetary Metals. Visit monetary-metals.com/Peter today to learn more. Now back to our show.
But it's funny because that's how humans learn in general, right? So, you or I or anybody listening, you go to Wikipedia, you look something up, it takes you on a rabbit hole, you go and learn 20, no, like you end up with, 30 open tabs on your computer. And it's incredible when you see a homeschool kid, that's exactly what they do, right? It's just because there's an endless amount of exciting stuff to learn, and human nature is that it's fun to learn new stuff. It is not like serving a sentence in prison. So it's really a striking difference. So a while ago, and this was CNN, I think, called your books part of the, quote, right-wing children's entertainment complex, as opposed to the left-wing children's entertainment complex. So tell us about the books. Are you writing propaganda? Are you turning kids into rabid libertarians who will leave everybody alone? What's happening here?
So the fun part of the story first, when that CNN article came out, we took a screenshot of the article, we plastered it all over our social media, we sent it to our huge email list, and we told everyone, hey guys, CNN's coming after us. This weekend only, get 50% off the books. Use the coupon code CNN. We sold, I think it was over like 100,000 books that weekend alone, just from that little stunt. To which I then went back to Twitter at the time and I said, hey, does anyone have any contacts at MSNBC? I'd love to get them to pile on us as well. Look, in the early years of doing Tuttle Twins, I got kind of defensive whenever people would be like, oh, you're just doing, propaganda, libertarian propaganda for kids or whatever. And I'd kind of have my excuses and my reasons. I'd say, well, no, propaganda is when a teacher is closing the door, parents don't know what's being taught, you have a captive mind, captive audience, and you're propagandizing them with, your content. That's how I would kind of push back. I've softened up in my defense of this accusation. In fact, I've leaned into embracing it because, yes, I think we are engaged in propaganda. Because what is that ultimately? Fundamentally, it's just the propagation of ideas. And every child is getting exposed to and bombarded with all kinds of ideas. Why would we not compete for the hearts and minds of the rising generation and instead surrender, their minds to our ideological adversaries? They're doing it. They're not going to stop. So we might as well compete and create our own propaganda. So sure, there's a pejorative side to propaganda. You look at, the Nazi regime or whatever that we typically associate with, but fundamentally everything. I mean, this episode, this your podcast, your videos, my work, it's all propaganda. Now, I think there can be positive, productive, ethical propaganda, and there can be the horrible kind, right? But same with indoctrination. Fundamentally, it's just teaching the doctrine, right? So these kids are going to be taught the doctrine, whether it's like the woke worldview or a more like liberating, pro-humanistic, empowering worldview, right? And so ultimately, they're going to be taught something. Their minds are sponges. They're going to form some kind of worldview and try and look at the world through that lens. Why would we not want to give them a healthier foundation, a better outlook on life? So yes, Tuttle Twins is propaganda. We are trying to indoctrinate the young in partnership with their parents, mind you. We're not trying to go directly after the kids ourselves, and I think that's an important distinction. And frankly, at this point, it's as much about the parents as it is about the kids because we're teaching the parents alongside their own children. So we embrace the term now. It's not necessarily on our marketing materials where we say, help and we want to help you indoctrinate your kids. But that's the battle we're in. We are in a war for children's minds. Their minds are ground zero in this ideological conflict. I would rather not surrender. I would rather not my children become an ideological casualty on that battlefield, not having been equipped. Like, think of it. You send your kid to, like, let's say some far-flung Middle East war, and if the military did not equip your child with, body armor and a weapon and knowledge of the enemy, right, and like rules of engagement and so forth, you would be incensed if your child was put on that physical battlefield without being adequately prepared. Why do we do the same in the kind of ideological equivalent of sending our children out into this mind war that we're all in without the requisite, body armor and weaponry, knowledge of the enemy and the rules of engagement? So the plea is for parents to be like, wake up, this is an ideological battlefield. And if you don't want your children to become a casualty, you need to fortify their minds with some really powerful ideas. That's where the Tuttle Twins is there to help.
I completely agree. I mean, the sort of mainstream holds up this ideal of objectivity, right? So the university supposedly is this objective. It is, I'm sure you've talked to professors, and there's actually data on this. Professors are far and away the most closed-minded people on earth. It is an utter and complete lie, and they always aim that as us. So whenever we're having a conversation, we have to go both sides. Whenever they're having a conversation, they call us names, shut us up, deplatform us. So, if you talk about some contentious political topic, like the question of should the government have more control over society or less, I have never in my entire life met a person who is unbiased on that. It is the only person who could be unbiased is an infant. I have never met this mythical unbiased person. Professors claim to be unbiased. Never. So I think you're absolutely right. Embrace it. They're going to get the other side of the argument because they're submerged in it. Everybody from Taylor Swift to up and down the line. They're going to get plenty of exposure to the pro-government argument. Just unapologetically, here's the other side of it. They're going to make up their minds anyway, but giving them both sides.
Agreed.
Yep. So talk a little bit. It actually occurred to me that there may be people listening who don't know Tuttle Twins. So just kind of give like a brief rundown.
So the original premise was there's all these amazing texts out there that are very difficult to read. I'm talking like F.A. Hayek's Road to Serfdom, right? Or Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, right? And there's all these important, amazing things by Rothbard and Mises and others, and that you well know, that if you have an academic level understanding, you can slog through that material, that very dry but powerful material. So the original proposition for Elijah and I, Elijah's the illustrator and my partner in the Tuttle Twins, was to take some of the most powerful writing that's ever been produced from this kind of free market liberty perspective and turn it into children's books, not only for kids of all ages, but their parents as well, to make these ideas more accessible. And then ultimately point families, the parents or the older kids, to those original books. Like, hey, if you found this interesting, go read this original book. When we started, we had no grand vision of what it's become. It was just a fun idea, literally for a single book. And so when Elijah and I were trying to decide what book was most influential for us that we would want to turn into a children's version, it was an easy answer for both of us. It was The Law by Frederick Bastiat. And it's more of a booklet or an essay that he wrote in French. He was a French statesman, kind of a classical liberal Jeffersonian type. And so we took that turned it into a children's version. We put it online. If you ever watch Shark Tank, like I watch it religiously, I really enjoy watching that show. The type of product that the sharks are always reticent to invest in is something that's a category creator, where you're not only having to like convince the customer to buy it, you're having to help educate them about what this even is because it's a new category. That's very difficult to do. That's what we had to do. When we started in 2014, even our own like libertarian conservative friends, many of them were like, let kids be kids, right? I'll talk to my kids about this when they're getting ready to vote for the first time, right? We got some of that internal pushback from the community. Again, this is 2014. Then you get into all the woke nonsense and you get all the, Marxist ABCs for kids and all the crazy gender stuff. Now, no one thinks we shouldn't talk to kids. Everyone agrees. And now you've got other companies that have started creating children's material as well. But we were the OGs having to like convince people, hey, we ought to talk to our children about our values. We take our kids, those of us who are religious, to Sunday school. We inculcate these truthful ideas that we believe in on a religious side. Why would we not do the same for our cultural and economic and political values that we think are based on true and first principles? So that's where the Tuttle Twins, was designed to empower parents to teach their children. We're talking ideas like entrepreneurship, property rights, the golden rule, sound money, the importance of persuasion over coercion, natural rights, individual liberty, all this kind of stuff. That one would hope the schools would be this very pro-American, classical, liberal founding fathers type of worldview that would be taught in our schools. It isn't. Our schools, I hate that collectivist term, taught in the government schools, I should say, but it's not. So we've got books for toddlers, like literally we have board books. Oh, here, I got one. We have, here is, for those who are watching the video, the ABCs of economics. And so every letter, like here's T is for taxes, and the money is being all sucked away from the kid. We've got one of my favorites. Q is for quantitative easing, and it shows the Fed with all this money blowing up. So we got these fun, cutesy little, we got 6 of these toddler books. We've got books for the kind of elementary age, which is the first series that we started with that we're most known for. And then we have, you remember, I'm sure, back from like the 80s, the choose your own adventure books that were really popular. Those were same. They were a big hit. We created a version that we called Choose Your Consequence, where the teen reader gets to kind of similarly pick, if you want this to happen, go to page whatever, but it's all about the consequences of decisions. And so there's political and economic type stuff interwoven through these fun, adventurous fiction stories. So we've got that whole series for teens. We also have a guidebook series. This is actually some of our most popular books now. For example, the Tuttle Twins Guide to Logical Fallacies. And every chapter is a different logical fallacy with some easy examples and cartoons that make it easy to understand. Or the more popular book now in that guidebook series, which is the Tuttle Twins Guide to True Conspiracies, where every chapter is a different, fully vetted, documented, actual government conspiracy that anyone can go, look up online and whatever. We've consolidated it for teenagers into this very provocative book. So we've got that for teenagers. We've got 2 history books. We have curricula. We have a podcast. And we have a cartoon that we partnered with Angel Studios on. It's in its 3rd season. Became the topmost crowdfunded kids media project. When we launched, we raised millions of dollars. It's a very high quality, hilarious cartoon where we're teaching all kinds of stuff, and it's free to watch on Angel Studios app or on angel.com. So for us, it's really just about creating this content empire that empowers parents, whether their kids are more, visual learners or they want to read books or whatever. We're trying to create just this library of material to teach the ideas of human flourishing, because the schools aren't doing it, the world needs it. And so we stepped into the breach to say, let's fill this void and create all these resources to empower parents to teach their kids this stuff to try and, save the kids, save the world, basically.
A word from our sponsor. If you run a business and you're looking to get customers excited about your loyalty and reward program, you can now implement Bitcoin rewards with Oshi Loyalty. You get all the perks of a full-featured loyalty and rewards program with real Bitcoin rewards every time your customers shop, refer, and engage. Boost customer retention, loyalty, and lifetime value. And if you're looking for Bitcoin rewards when you shop, check out the dozens of companies at the Oshi Marketplace at oshi.tech/shop. Start earning Bitcoin today. Now back to our show.
What is some of the feedback you've gotten? Like, I imagine, like before and after on how the kids looked at the world.
Oh, I could, talk to you all day about this. The stories are so fun. I mean, I like to tell people I'm a drug addict, not the kind of drugs that Hunter Biden's using. My drug of choice is dopamine. I get a steady drip of dopamine all day when we're getting emails and text messages and DMs from parents sharing their stories. Like one silly one, but that I like. So we've got this book called The Tuttle Twins and the Miraculous Pencil, which is based off of Leonard Read's famous essay, I, Pencil, where the twins learn how pencils are made, and in the process, they learn how markets work. And so this dad emails me a story. He was at the grocery store with his kids. I think the daughter was like 10 or maybe 11. And they're walking down the chip aisle, and he's talking to her as they're walking, and he turns to her, and she's not there anymore. So he turns back. She's back at like the potato chips section, staring at the chips. He walks back over to her, and he's like, honey, what are you doing? And she turns to her dad, and she says, Dad, I get it. I understand spontaneous order. And like, what 10-year-old ever uses that term, number one? But number two, she had this light bulb moment where she was connecting a principle in the book that was explained in the book, but now she's connecting it to real life. Of course, spontaneous order, for those who don't know and haven't read the original essay, is this idea that markets work through the collective individual decisions of many people, all spontaneously creating this order in society through the marketplace. If, I'm using this computer right now, the computer involves millions of people, each producing ore and creating chips or designing software or milling the wood for the packaging of the box, like all these things that come together. There's no president of pencil production. There's no czar of laptop production coordinating these activities. So that's the term spontaneous order. And this girl was realizing it because she's staring at these potato chips and she sees all these flavors, and there's ridged and baked and plain, and there's no czar overseeing which, quantities and types of potato chips. It's just the abundance of the market that is spontaneously creating that order. So many stories like that where the parents are like, hey, we enjoyed reading the book. We had a lot of fun reading it. But then in the car, we were having this conversation, or in this case at the store, or we're at the football game, right? And these kids start having these aha moments where the principles are connecting to the real world. And they're realizing like the biggest thing that your average Tuttle Twins reader likes about being a Tuttle Twins reader is that they feel smarter than most adults. And quite frankly, they are smarter on these issues than most adults. I like to say whenever I'm asked, what ages are your books for? Of course, now we have all ages, but like the core books that we're most known for, I would always say they're for ages like 6 to 11 and members of Congress, because they're full of pictures and they're, easy enough for even congressmen to understand. These kids love learning big ideas. I'll wrap Peter with this. The thought that comes to mind is like Thanksgiving dinner. I don't know if you ever experienced this, but when I was like 12 or 13, I wanted to be at the adults table and not sitting with all the little kids, right? I was in this awkward threshold, right? Where I aspired for greatness rather than the being with all the squabbly little kids. And I think it's that way with kids, generally speaking. Every kid wants to be a bigger kid. They want to be an older kid. They want to be a teenager. They want to be an adult. But our educational material too often treats them like they're a little kid. It meets them at their level. The Tuttle Twins is different. It's very challenging, ideas packaged simply with stories that make it easy and accessible. But the ideas are still provocative, and they're big, and they're kind of intellectual at an adult's level. And what we found is that kids rise to the occasion. They love it. They love, the exposure. They love knowing that they know stuff that most kids don't learn. So that to me is the gratifying part, is that we can package these ideas in a way that are accessible to them. And then imagine if we're able to scale this up and do this for millions of kids. This is like societally impactful stuff, to be getting these ideas, planting these seeds at an early age. So it's what gets me up every morning just with a smile on my face. I love doing this work. I feel like I'm friggin' Johnny Appleseed, just throwing these libertarian seeds out in the hillside, not knowing, which ones will sprout and what they'll look like 30 years from now. Who's the future Ron Paul that if we get them now with the Tuttle Twins book, they'll help save the world, with the Doge 30 years from now, whatever that looks like, to turn humanity around. It's just really fun work, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it.
Yeah, it totally sounds like it. And I completely agree. Kids will rise to whatever level you present them with. One of our early rules, we figured, look, kids learn whatever language they're raised in. Right? If they're raised in Chinese, they'll learn Chinese. If they're raised in Germany. And so we figured, okay, well, let's just go ahead and use the highest level word we can possibly conjure, and they'll learn it. And like it works. And similarly, if you give them reading material that is dumbed down, which public schools do because it's easier for the teachers who are idiots, they are going to fall to that level. On the other hand, if you give them challenging material, especially in a way that is actually fun for them, it is absolutely shocking how smart they get. Even on things that are allegedly challenging like math. I mean, you've got kids who are like 8, who are adult level in math because that's what they're immersed in. And, kids they have a lot more ability than I think people give them credit for. Now, something that I think you had mentioned, that you're doing like entrepreneurship modules, right? Or you're sort of putting, by the way, I saw an article recently that most parents don't want their kids to go to college. They want their kids to start a business or to go into an internship and then build a business out of that. So you're working on that now?
Absolutely. This story started, 8-9 years ago. You've seen these stories, as has everyone else, of little kids' lemonade stands getting shut down by the government. And it was like 15, 16, somewhere around there. I read this story. I thought it was ridiculous. I run a think tank, the Libertas Institute. And so I go to some legislators. I'm like, I have an idea. let's pass a bill in our state, Utah, that says if you're a minor, you do not need any business license. You do not need any kind of food handler's permit, no taxes, no nothing. Let's create an actually free market for kids, hopefully in the future for adults as well. But like, let's start with the kids, right? So we got the law passed, became the first state in the country to do it. Now we've helped about a dozen or so other states adopt we call it a lemonade stand law. And so after we got this law passed in Utah, we're like, hey, let's have some fun with it. So we launched a little like farmer's market, but the kids would run the whole show. So mom and dad could help set up the booth, but then they have to sit back and the kids are selling real products, real money. We call it the Children's Entrepreneur Market. We've now scaled it into 26 states. We'll be fully national in 2 years. The goal by 2028 is to be serving 500,000 kids every year through this program. So it's children'sentrepreneurmarket.com. It's a mouthful. So it's also a spelling test to see if you can spell children'sentrepreneurmarket.com. And so it's for kids age 5 to 17, real products, real money. They're learning about free enterprise. They're learning about marketing, product design, customer service, pricing, not through textbooks and lectures, but through hands-on. We give out scholarships. We just got done giving out over $75,000 in little $500, $100, $250,000 type scholarships to kids to help support their business. And Peter, it comes down to this. I think the best way to create libertarians, freedom fighters, whatever you want to call them, people who are passionate about freedom, is to get them involved in ownership in some capacity. If you own something, you naturally want to defend it. We need to move our society away from being passive consumers into also being active producers as well. Ayn Rand called them moochers, right? That you have all these moochers all over the place. We need to create the consumers. We need to help kids feel like they have ownership in creating something, being part of the solution, problem solving. And that's what this program is all about. So it's kind of adjacent to the Tuttle Twins. It's like a companion project that we do. As I said, we're quickly scaling this nationally. We're all over the place, half the country, at least for right now, but we're quickly scaling it up. So we're all over social media. It's a fun project for anyone out there with kids. The goal is to be in every major metro area. And just to give you a little, taste, remind me, Peter, where you live? What metro?
We're in Orlando, Florida.
Perfect. So we're in Orlando. We've got these markets going in Orlando. And the way it works in Orlando is we hire someone who lives there and they plan all the markets in the Orlando area. And the goal every year is to get to do about 10 to 20 of these markets in the Orlando area and then also in every other metro area. And that means you bring your kids to one. And by the way, the average kid makes $150 at a 3-hour market. So the danger here is my kids a few weeks later after our first market, I'm like, hey, can I pay you you want to earn $5 to pull some weeds or whatever? They're like, why would I do that when I can go to the market and make all this money? So I priced myself out. But then there's multiple markets. So your kids are like, I love that. I want to do that again. They're able to go get additional experience, refine the pitch, refine the product, try again multiple times in any given year. So it's just super, super fun. And again, I think it's a function of getting kids learning these ideas in ways that are non-traditional. They're outside of the classroom. So children'sentrepreneurmarket.com is where that's at.
I think it's a fantastic idea. You see these dynamics in a lot of families where the kids want something, a gaming machine or a vacation or whatever, and the parents are kind of yelling at them, like, what do you think, I'm made of money? And talk about flipping it around, right? Where it as a parent, once the kid is thinking entrepreneurially, at that point, you're excited when they want something. You're like, you want a $6,000 gaming machine? Fantastic. So now you're going to have the motivation to build a product because it's going to take 40. Yeah. And, they can see it step by step. They're not moochers. They're not beggars. They're not sitting there tugging at your coattails, asking for handouts. Or, you are cooperatively sitting down and saying, okay, that would be a lot of fun to have that machine. You wouldn't have any lag. This is important to young boys, as you know. And so let's talk about how to do it. Yep, that's absolutely fantastic. And a lot of these, there was an article recently, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal. They were talking about all these kids who started businesses, like really simple things, fixing screens or, posts on fences and painting things. And a lot of these businesses, they turn into $1 million businesses because none of the smart kids are trying to do that. the smart kids are all sitting there, trying to get their, critical theory degrees. A lot of that basically takes the competition out. And so a lot of these are just wide open, like the most simple business you could possibly imagine. You work hard, you do what you say you're going to do, you show up on time, you do a good job, you screw anything up, you fix it. I mean, very, very basic, almost common law principles. And these things turn into $1 million businesses.
I think you're right. It's why you see Micro and others pushing the trades as an alternative to college rather than wasting, tens of thousands of dollars and 4 years of your life during like your lowest risk opportunity to go launch something and try things and go bold. You're sitting in a classroom. So I'm grateful that you have Micro and others like him pushing out there, because you're right. You go into a trade, you want to be a plumber. Maybe it's not the sexiest thing, but you have no debt. You're earning money day one. You're earning 4x the money of any of your same age peers who are pursuing other jobs, only to find out that they're struggling to get a job with their, marketing degree, and they're a barista at Starbucks trying to, pay down their college debt or hope for forgiveness from, Biden and Kamala. And so that you get these people who take ownership of their life. They're like, I can do something productive using my hands. I'm proud of the work I'm accomplishing. I'm making a killing. I'm my own boss. Like, that is the American dream for so many people. And it's not out of reach for anyone. Again, there's an abundance of opportunities to pursue. And look, I don't think our program, like promoting entrepreneurship, I don't think everyone is or ought to be an entrepreneur, but I do think everyone ought to think entrepreneurially, right? What we're really teaching these kids is not, hey, you should own your own business someday. What we're teaching them is problem solving, because that's what entrepreneurship is, right? It's fundamentally just like seeing a problem, creating a solution. And you can do that as an employee at any job, big, at any company, big or small, right? You can be entrepreneurial within your own sphere of influence. You can be an entrepreneurial husband or wife or parent. You could be an entrepreneurial neighbor. You could be an entrepreneurial member of the community and be a problem solver. So that's fundamentally what we're trying to teach kids. We're just using the profit motive to entice them to learn all these ideas. And Peter, it works wonderfully.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, that's a tenet of Austrian economics, as you know, that every single activity is fundamentally an entrepreneurial gamble. You reach for the coffee because you think it's not going to fall on your foot. You think it's going to satisfy your thirst, etc. Every single thing you do. And that, as opposed to the public school mentality, which is, I mean, it really is prison. I'm shocked how healthy the kids are after 12 years of that environment, not just the dumbing down, but just, that obedience is the absolute highest, goal in life. I mean, it's shocking that people come out of that as sane as they are. Something that I wanted to ask you, just kind of wrap up here. My wife, so she homeschools. Our kids are 13 and 15, so we're most of the way through the process. But she's really excited that I'd be talking to you today. She wanted me to ask you about civics. So there's a survey, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, 70% of Americans fail basic civic literacy. Of course, they took the civics modules and they replaced that with woke garbage. So things like, what are the three branches? Who's the president? How many amendments? And of course, that's critical to actually becoming a competent voters. So talk a little bit about that. I think with Tuttle Twins, you've tried to address a lot of that as well.
It's not just for the adults using the statistic that you're mentioning. The NAEP scores a couple years ago, they assessed fourth graders, eighth graders, 12th graders. A couple years ago, the NAEP scores for the eighth graders came out and found that only 13% of America's eighth graders are proficient in American history. Wow. Like what becomes of a country when its future voters know nothing about its founding principles or its historical background or anything like that? Nothing good, right? And so this is a problem in the schools, despite all the social studies and all the civics education, both pre-woke and post-woke. This has been a problem for a very, very long time. So a few years ago, we actually embarked on a little study research project to kind of assess this, put our fingers on it. We bought all the leading textbooks for like what was it, 4th through 8th graders, roughly, all the social studies books. We wanted to see how are these textbooks teaching America's founding, the Constitution, the Revolutionary War, right? These kind of core early American principles. And so we got all these books. We did this research project. The very short conclusion is that all of these textbooks did a phenomenal job if your goal is to prepare these kids to one day win Jeopardy by having all of these factoids crammed in their brain, right? This person wrote a letter to this person, this committee on this date wrote this thing to this guy, the clouds were like this that day, they wore this color uniform, right? It's just chock full of just factoids. Superficial history is what I call it. Now, if your goal isn't Jeopardy, if your goal is to produce a well-rounded child who understands the ideas and the values and the philosophies that were at issue then, and more importantly, how those ideas and values and philosophies relate to our day, because again, the whole point of history is to apply it to the present to have a better future. If that's your goal, these textbooks did a completely miserable job. And this is why, Peter, I hated civics and history when I was a kid. I was the kid who would kind of raise their hand, be like, why are we learning this? Like, why does this matter? To which the answer was always, or typically, put your hand down, it'll be on the test. That's why, right? I never really understood as a kid why this crap I was being forced to learn had any relevance to my life back then in the 80s and 90s, let alone to today. So we decided to create our own series. We've got two big kind of textbooks. Here's one right here. So it's America's History. So it's about 250 pages long. But rather than textbook style, the whole thing is a set of stories. So we're using storytelling to teach about America's founding. This one starts 1215, Magna Carta, all the way through 1776. Volume 2 goes from the 1776 all the way through the adoption of the Bill of Rights. And then we're going to start working on Volume 3. But the whole point with our books is to correct for those problems and not just teach the superficial stuff, some of which is important. You want to know the basics of like what happened, of course. But we're focusing on, number one, here's the ideas that they were debating. Here's the philosophies that were kind of, competing against one another. But then number two, here's why you should care about that in 2025 or 2030 or, in the future. Here's why those ideas are relevant today. That's what we're trying to solve for. We're about to embark pretty soon on the nation's 250th birthday. And I get a little depressed at seeing the statistic you mentioned or the one that I did and how poor historical literacy we have in this country and how easily people duped are. You know the quote, those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. And so that's why we decided to start creating some specific like civic and history material, because if we don't get kids learning these ideas, we're just going to have more generations of ignorant voters who are easily captivated and indoctrinated by, authoritarian demons that can pull the wool over their eyes, and they're none the wiser because they don't know history and they don't know when this has happened in the past and how it turned out. So it's not a pretty landscape out there in civics education. Even worse so after 1619 Project, critical race theory, and all the rest. So we're trying to do our part, but we need, honestly, 1,000 more institutions like us pushing back because it's just so poor right now in the schools.
Well, and so much of the government money specifically is going to misinformation, like what comes out of the universities. I mean, just a ton of it, the 1619 Project, I think that was either directly or indirectly taxpayer funded. So this is government propaganda attacking, sort of trying to wipe out history and present this tabula rasa where, now these activists are just going to write whatever they want on there. And again, it's stunning that so many people reject it. I'm incredibly grateful that so many Americans have survived, the propaganda and are still here. But yeah, absolutely. I think you are doing God's work. I think it's really fantastic stuff that you're doing. Connor, this has been an absolute pleasure. Folks at home, check it, work, TuttleTwins.com, Tuttle. He's also over on X. The entire conversation is on X. Bring your friends, bring your neighbors. Everybody should be on X. Boyack, Boyack. Connor, thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thank you for coming on.
I enjoyed it as well. Thanks, Peter.
All right, and folks, we'll be back next time. And in the meantime, enjoy the new administration. Things are going to be lit. We'll be watching. See you next time.